Solving quadratics by completing the square. To solve quadratic equations by completing the square, we must use techniques we have learned previously. If a quadratic expression of the form x squared plus bx cannot model a perfect square, then you can add a term to form a perfect square trinomial. This technique is called completing the square. There are 6 steps to solve by completing the square. The first step is to collect all the variables on one side of the equal sign. The second step is to make the leading coefficient 1. The third step is to actually do the completing of the square. The fourth step is to factor any perfect squares if they happen to be perfect squares. The fifth step is to take the square root of both sides of the equation. The sixth and final step is to actually solve for the variable. So let's do an example. X squared equals 12x minus 20. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my variables on the same side. So that's going to give me x squared minus 12x equals negative 20. Then I'm going to complete my square. So that's going to be x squared minus 12x plus a negative 12 over 2 quantity squared minus 20. If I added the negative 2 over 12 squared to the one side, I got to add it to the other side. So plus negative 12 over 2 quantity squared. And then I simplify, write it as a completed square. So that's x minus 6 squared equals negative 20 plus 12 divided by 2 is 6. 6 squared is 36, so 20 plus 36. So that is x minus 6 quantity squared equals 16. And then I take a square root of both sides. When I take a square root, it becomes a plus or a minus. You add it or subtract it. So I have x minus 6 equals positive or negative 4. And then I add my 6. And I have x equals 6 plus or minus 4. So that's going to give me x equals 6 plus 4, which is 10, or x equals 6 minus 4, which is 2. So those are your two answers. For this next example, we have 18x plus 3x squared equals 45. So the first step I'm going to do is write it in my standard form. 3x squared plus 18x equals 45. Okay, and then I need to get a 1 coefficient, so I'm going to factor out a 3. So that's 3 and x squared plus 18 divided by 3 is 6. X equals 45. Now I'm going to add b, which is 6 over 2 quantity squared. Now if I add to one side, got to add it to the other side. But I am not just adding the 6 over 2 quantity squared. I'm actually adding 3 times 6 over 2 quantity squared, because that 3 is times everything. So it needs to make sure you put the 3 on the outside. And then I write as my completed square. So 3x plus 3 quantity squared equals 45 plus 3 times 6 over 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. 3 times 9 is 27. So I have 45 plus 27, which will give me a 22. So I have 3 times x plus 3 squared equals 72. And the next step is to divide by 3, get rid of the 3. And if I do that, I have x plus 3 squared equals 24. So I'm going to take the square root, plus or minus. giving me x plus 3 equals positive or negative 24, square root of 24. But I want to make sure that that is simplified. So if I tree that out, I get 4 and 6, 2 and 3. So that's the square root. Square root of 4 is 2. So 2 square root of 6 is my simplified square root. So that's going to be x plus 3 equals positive or negative 2 square root of 6. So then I subtract my 3 over. So my final answer is x equals negative 3 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 6. And that is your final answer. That wraps up your notes on solving quadratics by completing the square. Go through the practice problems and then watch the next couple videos before you take your quiz over solving quadratic equations.